That's funny. I suppose to start off, maybe I ask you, who were your grandparents and where did they come from?
They came from Westtown here, just up the road. The thatch down below Rockets. It's the oldest thatch to be there since the 17th century, The thatch.
And what were their names?
They'd have been Cullen, Cullen. And we were powers then over the Smarters. She'd a brother she'd an uncle Power, and it's complicated. Then the grandmother married another Power, so we went from Cullen back to Power again, But it's just below Rockets there, the farm just below Rockets, and the land up here in Westtown, where Paddy would have been her home place then when she got married. The grandfather came from Ballygunner, Richie Power. Character of a man,
And your own father then?
My own father was born up the road there in 1917, up where Paddy lives now, just on the Westtown Cross. He gave all his life here in Westtown, fishing the majority of the time out in that bay. I still have his boat down below.
And would you gone fishing with your father?
Oh, I would have as a kid, We gave our youth out there. Used to be kept at home from school to go fishing. All the rocks there, we knew 'em, every inlet and whatnot, they all had Irish names, from Newton Cove up, the Cahirica, the Coolina Dove, the Doris Dove, the Lickeen, Trana Sukal, just down the strand underneath me there, We knew 'em all, but when we were kids there, we used to go down after the Gully's eggs, and we couldn't get hen eggs at that time, so the Gully's eggs are the same thing, They were lovely. If there were people doing it today, the Gullies wouldn't be overpopulated the way they are now, attacking people on the prom. Yeah, we gave a lifetime out there, although I never wished to go out there again. I fell out of the boat twice out there, and the father pulled me back in by the head of hair, and none of the two of us could swim. But he survived out there, He was out in Newton Cove with Jack Vetty. He'd be Jack Vetty Power. God, Jack was nearly 90, like when I was a young fella, He'd tell you some of the old stories, but this Sunday anyway, they used to go out, and part of their plan would be they go out and they catch the mackerel early in the morning, and they'd hit the strand of a Sunday. They'd pull in, but this day the father used to work for H.E. O'Neill's, and Paddy Jones used to live on the Priest Road, and the top man was coming down. And Paddy said, yes, Mickey, he said, would you bring Mr. Jones, he said, out for a bit of fishing. He said, he's into fishing, I will, says the father, I'll bring him out, So he went out with Jack Vetty and that, and they went out, and he had a great day out there. But anyway, they got near the strand, and your man knew nothing about this, He said, now we'll catch a wave now and row like hell. It was all rowing at that time, And in on the strand, and they pulled up the boat, And the father handed Mr. Jones a bundle of paper. He said, I'll sell now, he said, new wrap, fresh mackerel, 4pence each. He said, your man went back to Dublin after, he said, and he told it at every board meeting, the greatest day he ever had in Tramore, It's simple things like, At that time, people, they had nothing, but they weren't in debt either, There was more of a crack around the place, like Tramore and that, Quantum, People like Cooney and those, they could be in the pub during the day. When they had a few bob, they enjoyed it, like, you know. They didn't believe in giving anything to the banks, you know, which everyone is doing today, like, you know. But you had fellas like Kevin Burns and Jackie Burns and Bobby Taylor, you know, all great characters, you know. But you probably heard the one about the father's 127, the famous 127 car that he had, you know. The father was never a good driver, you know. Actual fact, he never had a license. I had the same name as him, you know. He used to always, when he get pulled in, "Hey boy," he said to you, "Have you got to lend that to you again?" He said, for half an hour. He'd go up and hand it into the barracks, you know. That was before identification, or that came on it, like, you know. But he used to be always burning out the clutch in the old 127, you know. I'll never forget this Saturday, they decided to change the clutch. There were 4 of them at it. Jackie Burns would have been the mechanic. Kevin and Bobby, his assistants. And the father running in and out of the house with a bottle of whiskey every few minutes. Have one. They were at the car for about a good half day anyway, and it up on blocks, and Jackie Burns laying down underneath it, and Kevin passing in the things anyway. They took out the clutch, they put in the clutch, and they went in, they had their dinner, and they came out and they left down the car off the blocks and that, and they told the father to go away for a spin on it, see what it was like. When the father pulled away, they copped the new clutch, was still in the box. They were at to handing back in the old one again in under the car, and they were at to putting it up. They were so fucking drunk. They're the characters you had, you know. But
you as kids said you sold fish to the neighbours?
We used, myself and Tess, we used often kept at home from school of a Friday. You go off on the carrier or the bike and you'd sell the fish. You called to every house, Cullen Power, West Town, and that at that time mackerel were 3p each, 3 old pennies, and you go along, everyone would take 2. A house with a big family, they'd take a good few, you know. Often we'd be out the night before Thursday and we'd land at Newtown Cove, and you bring the box of mackerel in, and at that time we used to put them up in the ferns. The ferns act like a fridge. The sun, keep the sun off them in the morning, keep them cool. The next morning then you go down and get them and away, and you'd be selling them around. At that time there were 5-6 boats out of Newtown Cove, and Joe Henry Power. You remember Joe? He had no legs at the end. He was down Ballymacaw, but that's his cottage straight across the road. And they used fish during the summer, and they used to go away to England in the winter time. There were nothing around, but there used to always be barrels at home, and when the fish was got, they used to be salted for the winter and put into barrels, and that because we had no fridges at that time, you know. And we'd have fish for the majority of the winter. They'd be salty, but you'd have fish, you know. But yeah, that's where the father spent the majority of his life, Joe.
And who would have been living around the area at that time?
Well, you had Joe Henry across. At that time, there were only about 9 houses around the West Town Road. You started off down, you had the Keoghans. They'd have been the first house as you come up. They had a small farmhouse, and Mikey Keoghan, and then you came up and you had Dickie Vetty, he'd be Dick Power, and he was a farmer. He used to have the farm now over the Cliff Road, where Newtown Glen is. He owned that field. Actually, that's a field that was sold for a fiver and a bag of potatoes back in 1914 when a fellow was going off to the war. That's where Newtown Glen is built now. And Dickie owned the farm just up on the turn of the road. I think Dr. McCann is living there now. And then you came further up the road. The next house was Johnny Dial. Johnny Dial used to live there. He had a farm. He was married to my grandaunt. And then you had, when you came back up the road again, you had Mrs. Power. They were Powers again. We used to call them the Bishop Power. And then you came up and you had the Henry Power. That would be Joe Henry. And you went up around the road then. You had the Sheens. And then you went up, you had Rocket and John Mackey. They were on opposite sides of the road. And then you went up, my grandmother, and then Bridget Coffey's mother lived there, and then you turned left up the road and you had Rocket's Pub. Many's a good night we had up there as kids. We used to go in there, and be looking in the windows. I remember back in the 60s, the cars were all the way down to nearly our house, down in the bottom of Westtown. The Clancy brothers were up there, and that was massive at the time, People used to go there for Mrs. Rocket's cooking. She used to make the brown bread and that, And a character that was always there was Richard Dunn. And Richard used to mind the place, look after the place, and he was a character when we were growing up. He used to do the deliveries, the milk. He used to bring the milk down to Brady Burns and the cigarettes, and every time he'd bring down the milk and the cigarettes, Richard would wait. Brady Burns would have to give him back a cigarette, He wouldn't go away unless he got back the cigarette. But Rockets was a great place. They used to keep cattle on where the pitch and putt is now. They used to keep cattle there, and back in those days, all the slops of the drink used to be gathered up in the morning, and they used to feed it to the cattle with the grain. And often you'd see the cows going down the road and they'd be staggering, The only one that'd be standing straight was Richard going down, hunting them down. I can still see him putting his hand on them. Come on, Betsy, come on. And he tapping them down the road. They used to graze out there now where the pitch and putt is, Actually, this place back in the 60s, this was all a pitch and putt here, And they moved from here up to Kathleen Rockets up there, I suppose more shelter from the sea. The sea can be wild here at times,
You had some great characters in Rockets.
Oh, you had great characters there, I think my grandfather Richie and that we'd be hunted out of it, We used to go up there every Thursday. Clover meats had come out, and to be breastbones and all that would be put on the table, and to be who'd be there the first would get the best, and who'd be last would get the worst, and the cat could be sitting on top of him. Those were the days, No one died from it though, Kathleen was a lovely woman, Character. Sadly missed out of this place. She passed away there just late last year, you know. Kathleen was a lovely woman, you know, as Mrs. Rocket, you know. But sadly now the place is gone, you know. But there used to be some stories told there, if I could remember half of them, you know. Oh, Michael, yeah. Was the one about Michael, Michael was sitting on the ditch there in Fenner one day, and this stranger came along and he pulled up and he said to Michael, he said, "Excuse me, please," he said, I'm lost," he said. "Could you tell me the way," he said, "to Dublin?" "Be Jesus," says Michael, he said, "if I was you," he said, "I wouldn't go there." This was back the time of the Troubles, John. The Englishman was a bit stunned, and he turned to Michael and he said, "Well, why not?" "Sure, Jesus Christ," he said, "if you're lost in Fenner," he said, "you won't have a hope in hell in Dublin," he said. They're Michael, they're the characters you had, Joe. They were brilliant characters, Joe.
Oh, there been a lot of people from Tramore would have come out to Rockets then as well.
Oh, they regular. Fellas of a Sunday used to go out there like James Morrissey and Joe Deneen, and they used to all go regular up there, and regular they were playing the cards of a Friday night and all that, like, you know, you had a whole pile that used to come out from Tramore, and they used to be with the locals up there, because at that time pubs were more of a social place than for alcohol or whatnot. Alcohol, people used to always drive to the pub, but they wouldn't go mad, Joe. It was more a social event than like today when young people go out, they go out to get drunk. Joe, and back then you went out and people would talk about you if you were drunk, you know. It was nearly a sin if you were drunk, like, so you only drank what you could manage, you know, in those days, you know. But there were some great characters there back, if I could remember half them now, you know. But they were great people, even from Cullen Power, the Smiths and that, like, they used to all come over there, Bridget Coffey's mother and that, like, you know, they were all in their 80s, but the stories they tell you, you know, and that, like, you know. Jack Vetty Power now used to live down alongside us. He was a great man with local knowledge, you know, and that he'd tell you old stories and whatnot, like, you know. They say the Metal Man down there now, and the Metal Man is for danger, and the two piers are for the entrance to a harbour in Brownstown, you know. I remember Jack telling me, you know, he was 90 at the time, and he telling me, they said they put that up after the Seahorse, you know, the Metal Man for danger, you know, and the two piers for the entrance to the harbour. Jack said, that, he said, you know, in the old days, he said, they used to light the fire on the headland, he said, to guide the sailing ship into the harbour, he said, you know, and the locals used to light it on this one, he said, and they'd go into Tramore Bay, he said, and they'd loot the ship then, he said, oh, like that, he said. That was only an excuse to build them, he said, you know, there are things that only they'd be passed down, like, you know.
And the Metal Man, is it true that he was supposed to be on the Brownstown side and not on this side at all?
No, the Metal Man was always there because he was for danger. Tramore was danger, and the two piers are for the entrance to a harbour. And when you're out at sea, both of them are like that, they're headlands. You only see the headland, and the two piers then bring into Waterford Harbour. Sailing ship, once they came in here, it couldn't get back out again. Joe, that's why they used to light the fire on this side. That's going back in the 16th century and that, when they were sailing ships, like, you know. Like there's a good few wrecks there along there, like the Rose and whatnot is out off there, you know. People have told me that, like, you know. They wouldn't be me grandparents now, but I'd have an uncle that would know something about it, like, you know. But there was a good few wrecks there. That's where we'd used to be fishing often now, like, you know, because the fish would hang around the wrecks and that, like, you know, and the father knew the majority of them, you know. The old fishermen knew them, you know.
What would you be mainly fishing for?
It was, well, back in the 60s, when I was a kid out there fishing, we used to always get whitening. You could go out in the bay there and come back with boxes of whitening. You don't get those anymore. You have to go off miles for them. But it was mainly mackerel. And we used to have the lobster pots as well, like, you know. There's very few doing the lobster pots now. Mickey Keown kept on the tradition, and one or two more, like, but at that time they used to be, well, there weren't much work around, so everyone was at the fishing, you know, to get the lobsters. Used wait at Newton Cove for Bobby Riley's father. He used to buy all the mackerel. That was his job back in the 60s. He'd pull up at Newton Cove and wait for the boats to come in. He'd come down and he'd buy the box of mackerel or whitening, and he'd take it away, Joe. He'd bring it to where he obviously made his money on it. He went away, but it saved the fishermen, because at that time they hadn't. I remember the father only had a Honda 50 at that time, like, you know, and he used to go every place on the Honda 50. One day they were down in the Ritz, and another great character that was in the Ritz was there was Bunny Rocket and Patrick Reardon and that, and they were throwing the darts, and of course the father was going home, and they asked the father would he bring the Buggy Kiley home, you know, and they all had a bit to drink, like, you know, and they brought the buggy out, and they put him up on the back of the Honda 50, you know, and the lads waved him off, and next, they were back in playing the darts, and the buggy walked back into the Ritz again, like, you know. The father went down around the cove and he hit the first bump up, and the buggy was sitting on the ground, and the father was gone, never missed him off the back of the bike. You know. Things like that, like, you know. The buggy was a character. I don't know whether you'd have remembered him or not, like, you know. And but all the houses then, I remember my mother now, she was from Cork and Clonakilty, and we actually, my father was driving a steel nail one day, and it went back and stuck on the corner of his left eye, and he was brought down to the Eye and Throat Hospital in Cork, and that's where he met my mother. He brought her back home with me, so I owe my existence to a steel nail. But when she came down to Tramore back in the 1950, I think it was, you know. And Mrs. Kiley over the Cliff Road, and Kitty Dunphy and Bridie Burns, and they were all great neighbours gathered around her, and friends for life. And I remember when I was only a kid, she used to go over once a week over to Mrs. Kiley in the Cliff Road, and Mrs. Quinlan on the only two cottages now on the Cliff Road. Freddie bought Mrs. Quinlan's, and Mrs. Kiley is still in her cottage. She'd be the longest living person now at that side of the town, Miss Kiley, you know, Ross common woman. Joe. But
Going back to the lost of past, tell us the story that your father used to tell about the glasses.
about
The glasses.
the what you call it? He was out fishing. I can't remember. It was years since I heard that. He was out fishing this day, and they were pulling pots, and he was leaning out over the boat, and he lost his glasses, and he was without the glasses for a while. And this day he was hauling away anyway, and next he came up and he was a lobster wearing his glasses. The ones he used to tell, he went into Croaks this day, and he was out fishing, and there was this Dublin woman was in there, and the husband, and they said, "Well, Mickey, were you fishing today?" "God," he said, I was. "And did you catch many?" He said, "I had a good old day," he said. 99 of them I caught. And they were quoting us for a while, a woman turned, and she said, "Jesus," she said, "would you not have rounded off and said 100? I wouldn't tell a lie for one mackerel," he said. He always telling the lie. But there were some characters, the things they used to be. They were down in Croaks one day, Kevin Burns and Jackie Burns, and they were at the counter, and there was a customs man in there at the same time, and he was down at the far end of the counter, and they were talking away anyway, and they were on about what they found on the strand, how they'll share it out, and the whole lot. Like, your man, he was listening, and they kept on talking about it. In the end, anyway, a man couldn't wait any longer. "Lads, I'm listening to you there now," he said, "and you're going to have to hand it in," he said. "As the state owns that." "Sure," says the father. He said, "They can have it all," he said, "It's seaweed we were talking about." They drag a fellow out and that, but they were characters,
And how did you go from here then to ending up in the Gap University?
Years ago, we used to be living. It was a house belonged to the farm, and we were living down on it. And we had a granduncle, and at times he'd be cranky and whatnot, and he'd come down. He used to come in and say to the mother, and get Mickey to tar that roof. It was only a galvanised roof now at the time, It was actually the coachman's house belonged to the rectory. The coachman, there were 2 piers across from it. They're still there, they're built into the ditch now. But back in the 18th century or 19th century, the coachman used to live in it, belonged to the Smarters, or belonged to the rectory. And our family bought it. And we used to live there, and the mother got fed up of your man coming down to tell the father to tar the roof and living there. So she applied for a council cottage down the Gap in Riverstown, 1968. And we went down to Riverstown, the Gap, and the happiest life we ever had. The mother really loved it down there. Great characters down there. We were next door to Tom Carty, who taught me a lot of things. And that we used to do the pony trekking and that, and work in the sandcastle, the shop, the chipper and that, And we were never idle a day in our life. Tom Carty, he was a great fella to work for, looked after us. And that, so some great times in the pony trekking and that at that time when we used to do the pony trekking, there used to be cattle grazing down on the burrows. Powers opposite Crowbelly House now. They had Mikey and them. They used to herd the cattle down there in the morning and bring them back up to milk them in the night time, And often we rounded up the cattle for them. When they'd be way down, you'd bring them up with the horses and that, But at that time, it was very quiet down there, It was open, unspoiled, and that, So we had great times. I once brought Maxie, Dick and Twink down pony trekking. That was the time they just hit the fame, And, when you bring ponies down, they go down and they'd be slow going down. But when they turn around, you see, they'd be getting fed when they go back up. So they'd begin to trot on that, And I remember Twink, and she started screaming when the horse started trotting. The more she screamed, the faster the horse would go, And as they took off, I could only run two of them out into the tide, The horse, she fell off the horse. She broke her hand at that time. I'll never forget that. She had a few words with Mr. McCarthy about me.
And was the hydro down at that stage, or was it down?
Oh, the hydro was a beautiful place. At that time they had bats down there and putting green out in front and a fountain. It was a beautiful place. A beautiful place. They used to have salt bats down there. They had cellars. There were cellars underneath. That's where the bats were, and they used to bring in the salt water. And people used to come there that had probably arthritis and that, and they used to go there for the bats and that, It was very popular at that time, But that time, John H. Lodge owned a lot of, as he did here, he'd farm up here behind now. Bolsters bought it off him, but George Bolster would have bought it off him, but John H. owned it, an awful lot of the out where the Bolton Lake is now. That's where we used to keep the horses. They used to roam free out there at that time. And then Tramore Falta came in, another 72 or something like that, and I think that was one of the main reasons why Tramore lost a lot of its identity. They owned the Majestic, the Caravan Park. They bought everything, the Silver Slipper. They owned everything, and private enterprise kind of stopped. You had no hotels or anything. At that time, we used to, the racing in Tramore was the August bank holiday, the end of the harvest season. Every farmer used to come to Tramore for the 15th. Tramore used to be black. Galway was only in the halfpenny place to Tramore at that time. The middle of the racecourse used to be full, because my father used to work up there, himself and Tommy Flanagan. They used to be always on the starting of the races. They used to pull the cords up and down but they used to come from all over Ireland for the races on the 15th of August, but you're now just nearly gone, And Galway completely took over, and Listowel. But Tramore was the biggest at that time. So I think it was because Tramore, the individual couldn't buy any place in Tramore. Tramore Falta owned it all, and they had control on who did come and who didn't come, And in the long term, I think it was a disaster for Tramore. Some people won't like me saying that now, but it was. If one person, it's like the Deluxe down there, when that was an individual place and Johnny Seaview's was around the corner and you had Haney's and Drucker's shop at either side of it, you had life and activity in each and every one of them. But then when the one person bought the lot and then it closed down, the whole lot is all derelict now. There's nothing in that corner of the town, right? The one owner owned it, the whole lot, right up around and around the corner. And when he went, it's like down when you had the High B and Shallows and Joe Shea's, one used to enhance the other because people used to go there and they'd say, if we're fed up on one, we'll walk to the other and to the other. Whereas now, there's only one place open there now, Joe's, right? The High B is after opening up now. So it's beginning to come back again. But like, you can't have one owner own every place because human beings are curious, change, and they go from one place to the other because every place is different. Joe, a proprietor of a pub, he runs it different to the other, and that's what they go to see, and the different characters in a pub, like, you know. Some pubs they go into, people just sit around and chat. Other people have music, others watch televisions. They're all ran different. They all have their own, each identity, like, you know. One of the greatest pubs in Tramore was Crook's. Back there, he used to go in there, and my father spent an awful lot of his life going in there, and the characters that used to be in there, you know. And probably the greatest character going in there was the owner, Micheál Croke, you know. And the stories he'd tell you, you know. He was actually a great blacksmith, great farrier when we were kids. They used to have the forge up the main street, like, you know. Micheál was a great character, you know. A big, fierce, strong man, you know. And from working with horses all his life, like, you know. His father was a farrier, but I remember one day the father coming into Newtown Cove and the tide was low, and Micheál, at that time he was at joining the ESB, and he pulled up on top of the road and with the van, you know. And the father shouted, "Come down and give us a hand to haul up the boat," you know. So Micheál came down anyway, and the father, we used to put chocks underneath the boat to make it easy to come up on the gravel. And he'd say, "I'll say 1, 2, 3, and we'll heave." And the father went 1, 2, and Micheál heaved and pulled the front tars of the boat. And I'll never forget the father running after him with the stick. If he had to catch him, he'd have killed him. But a great character, Micheál, you know, and a great singer, a brilliant singer, you know. One of his great songs was "Come Down the Mountain," Katie Daly, you know, but a beautiful singer, an individual voice, you know, and a character, a lovely character, you know. Yeah, but that was one of the great pubs in Tramore, Croke's.
And do you remember some of the other businesses that would have been on the main street?
Oh, there were a lot of business on the main street. We used to come down. You had lodges shops on both sides at the top. You came down under that, you had Doherty's shop, Doherty's. And you came down then and you had, you had a taxi driver at the far side, Welch's shop. He wasn't a taxi. He was the same as Freddie Fitzgerald. Not taxi. They couldn't call themselves a taxi. They used a car for hire. You know, Hackney. Yeah, they were a Hackney. And you had Rahar's Garage at the top, like, that used to be always busy. Freddie took it over after, and Tony Hinks were there. You had Rita Barnett down. You had Conley's Pub next to Welch's shop. Gertie Stickies was in between. And then you went down and you had Michal Croke's blacksmith shop was just below Conley's Pub, just in there. And then you had Goodwin's milk shop. And you had the Ledger across the road, and you had Keogh's Pub. I'm probably passing one or two of the shops now, but it was a great Rita Barnett. You had Joe Creston. He used to do rifles and fishing, tackle and all that. You had Keneally's shoe shop. You had the ESB. You had the L&N at the far side. And the cinema across the road, Joe. And you had the shop across the road, name won't come to me now, the sweet shop for the cinema. Can't think of it now, the name will come back to me in a few minutes. And then you had Martin's shop at the far side of the L&N, Martin's, and you went down and you had Malay's Butchers, and you had Ollie Butchers, and you had Jim Welch's Butchers up at the top, like, and there's two characters now between Ollie and Jim Welch. It all depends on what story you wanted to hear, or which was the best story as regards which you'd go into, They could tell you many a one, like, I remember going into, with characters in the town, Tom Connors. I remember Tom. Tom was an awful fella. He used to deliver the bread here. When we were young here, he could chuck you into the back of the van and bring you halfway to Fenner and let you out, You'd have to walk home, but I'll never forget this day. It was Ollie's Butchers, And there was a girl, she was mine, Tom's kids, when they were young. And Tom came in one day, and a feature with Tom. Tom would always be rushing around the place, like, And this young one, she was old enough at the time, she'd have been a young woman, like, And Tom put his hand in his pocket. There had nothing there for the dinner. And he put the hand in his pocket. Run across Tolly, he said. Run up Tolly and get a half pound of Bull's Balls mince. And the girl never thought about it, And she went up and she asked for it at the counter. And Ollie said, "Who's it for?" She had to go away with embarrassment out of the shop. She never thought what she was in for. But they were the people that set you up, like, you want to listen twice to everything they tell you, because you could be going on a wild goose chase, I remember a man, and we go back a long time. We were down in Crokes one night, and Jackie Burns, young fella, he became a priest, still is a priest, and there were twins of them, and we were down in Crokes this night, and he was just had to go away and becoming a priest, and he came into Crokes this night, and Jerry Dalton was inside. But it wasn't a priest at all. It was his twin brother. He came in. And Jerry asked him, he said, "Father," he said, "the priest's blessing," he said, it's something you have to to get the first blessing off a priest, you know. And of course, he brought him out the door where the stairs was. He got him to kneel down, and he was giving them the blessing. He wasn't the priest at all. I'll never forget when Jerry Dalton heard that, he went bananas. They're the characters we had around the town, you know, the things that used to go on, like, you know, and that set you up, like, you know, the Burnses were queer fellas at it.
And do you think the characters are everything in the past?
Sorry?
Do you think the characters are everything in the past?
There's still a few going around, but not as many. The things were simple then, John. They were simple, like Cooney was a great character, like, you know, the things when they made the film there and that, like, and he was part of it, like a natural, John. To liven you up every day, you'd meet him, like, you know, because he'd lift your heart. You'd hear him a mile away, going up and down the street, like, you know. Fellas like that, Nicky Ann, you'd hear him a mile away, like, you know. There were some great characters, you know, great characters around. Limerick Bill, and all those fellas, like, you know. When we were going to school, and he used to have a badge from all over the world on his coat, like, you know. The dummy Corbett, you know, he was like a character, you know. He way more witty than vigilant than any of us, because he couldn't talk. He used to always read the lips, you know. And I remember one night, you know, he wasn't by no means religious. He had no religion at all, like, you know. But it was one night after the races. They came in to Crokes, and they wanted a game of cards, and he was with a priest and two other individuals, and they had a bit to drink, you know. And they wanted a game of cards anyway, and Mick Deneen said, sure, we'd play with him. I said, there's only two of us. He said, Jack will play, you know. So we sat down to play, dealt out the cards anyway. And the second game, the priest reneged, John. Within that, Jack, whoo, like that, every card went all around the place. He picked up the one he reneged like that, he held it up to the priest, blessed himself like that, whoo, like that. The characters, you know, that was the end of the game of cards, you know. Oh yeah, there's some great characters, you know. The twin McGrath over on, he used to be always with the father. And the young fella, you know, the young twin, the old twin was a great character up in Rockets, going back in our days, like, you know. The stories he'd tell you and that, like, if you could remember him now, like, you know, they won't come to me, but he was a great character, you know, the twin.
I suppose I'll finish up on this one. The Gap, where did we get this name from?
The Gap was always there because it was the cottages that were built down there, they were built by the British in 1112. They were kind of workhouses. And they all had an acre with them, like, you know. And the Gap was just a dead end. It was called the Gap by the old people. And people came there over all the years. They called it something terrace and this and that and the other thing. The only name that ever stuck to it was the Gap. And no matter how the people tried to bury it, the Gap became famous in its own self. And you had some great people lived in it, over the time, like, we lived in a house, it was owned by Ned Corbett, it was one of his last during the Second World War, off a ship, but there were some great characters down there. Great characters and great neighbours. When we went down there at that time, moved there in '68, and at that time, once a week the rosary would be said in a house, and everyone would have to go to that house. That house was done up for the rosary, and it went around. It was very religion. It just goes to show the difference in times now, like, they're a different time,
And do you think that sense of community is gone now?
Oh, it is. We never locked the door in our house. Never locked. It's only of late that had to happen, like, and people helped each other out an awful lot. But you take here West Town now, I wouldn't know half the people in the houses. They'd be new in, like, they only come and go from work, whereas before you visited each house, you grew up with them, and they all lived together. They all pulled together, The community thing is a thing of the past. But you're back even in those days, you might have only 3-4 guards in the town, but they knew everyone. Dog license, they'd be calling for the dog license, but I think the dog license was just to get to know the owner, like, now the guards, they don't know, because they're not here long enough. No fault on theirs, because they're shifted around, they're rotated around. I remember Pat Fitzgerald down there, he'd be at the other side now, like, he used to always be a great friend of the father. He used to follow the father around, and I remember he used to have a scud truck, He would always come up to Tramore, and he was coming up, he was driving up this day, and he was stopped by the guard, and could I see your license? And he showed him the license, like, and that's grand. Yeah. And you have a license for the dog? He said, sure, he's not driving, he said. Joe, they were the characters, Joe.
Hey, that's brilliant. I'm very happy with that. Are you happy? Brilliant.
Glad to be able to give you a bit of my time, That is. Be some things anyway. I never thought I'd talk for as long. You might edit back.